My name is May-Len Skilbrei, and I'm Professor of Criminology at the University of Oslo. My current research is on the operation and boundaries of the modern state, as it manifests in how it approaches the question of the sexual integrity and autonomy of its population. Among other things, I investigate how rape is formulated as a problem to be solved by the state, and how victims and their bodies are addressed in this. I'm also dedicated to understanding what kind of context the Nordic context is, and recently edited a book with the title Rape in the Nordic Countries, Continuity and Change, together with Kari Stefansen and Marie Heinskau, a project funded by the Nordic Research Council for Criminology. The scholarship of rape is highly international and rich, but the causes and consequences of rape are typically discussed in the literature as if time and place does not matter. I am therefore trying to unpack what the Nordic context does to how people and institutions address and experience rape. The Nordic countries is a highly interesting one from which to think about state-citizen relations. When countries in the region decriminalized acts such as homosexuality, cohabitation, abortion and pornography early, they were considered liberal. But they are also known for how the state more actively engages in spheres and acts that are considered private elsewhere. In the policy domain of sexuality, this is particularly evident, as the countries, and I'm talking here particularly of Norway and Sweden, take a liberal and strict approach at the same time. Both the shift towards more liberal norms on sexuality and towards more prohibitions in the realm of sexuality has been made possible by the efforts of rights movements and their willingness and ability to enter into alliances with the state. This means that while the causes of civil society potentially can gain traction, they may also have to be adjusted to be relevant and moderate enough to fit governmental agendas. This is the context for my talk, where I, via a couple of examples, will tease out what responses to critique says about what is at stake. In February 2021, Kajsa Ekis Ekman, a Swedish journalist and feminist debater, published an opinion piece in the Norwegian newspaper Klassekampen. In this, she argues that low levels of punishment for sexual violence in the region and reluctance to take accusations of rape via social media at face value indicate that the Nordic countries do not take sexual violence seriously. She holds the case of the US up as an example to be emulated, with its draconian punishments for sexual violence and where famous men lose their jobs if someone forward a claim against them. One reason why the Nordic countries do not share the US level of punishments for sex crimes is that they have a much lower level of punishment for all crimes. It regulates its population more through welfare than by fear of punishment. And Ekman could have benefited from reading David Garland and others who remind us that to rule by such fear is a trait of a weak, not of a strong state. Still, Nordic research has drawn attention to how punishment for sex crimes seems to be an exception to the region's punitive moderation, that punishment for sex crimes constitutes an exception to the Nordic exceptionalism, so to speak, particularly powerfully argued by Henrik Tam. My concern here is not whether the Nordic countries punishes sexual violence too little or too harsh. I'm rather interested in why the Nordic countries are vulnerable to this kind of critique. Ekman draws a very different picture than countries in the Nordic region give of themselves, and it also departs from how the countries are represented in international rankings. The Nordic countries present themselves and are presented by others as gender equality havens that take great care to protect their citizens from threats to their sexual integrity. Sweden, the country that Ekman uses as an example of the Nordic negligence, in 2019 even declared itself the first feminist government in the world. And the region has been key in moving the conversation about sexual violence from being one formulating rape as a threat to the sexual modesty of women to be about sexual integrity. This is a consequence of how feminists in the Nordic region were early in establishing sexual violence as a result of gender inequality, replacing the more common assumption at the time that sex crimes had individual reasons and consequences and stemmed from pathological psychological conditions. Today in the Nordics and beyond, sexual violence is firmly placed on as a topic related to gender equality, both in the sense that gender inequality, understood as structural inequality and cultural norms about gender and sexuality in society, serving as a cultural scaffolding for sexual violence, to use Nicola Gavis' term, and in the sense that the continued existence of sexual violence is seen as a barrier to achieve true equality between men and women. As the Nordics, and particularly Sweden, forefronts such an understanding of the causes, consequences, and importance of sexual violence, being deemed bad at handling sexual violence becomes a hard pill to swallow. Ekman's critique is possible exactly because a feminist interpretation of sexual violence is strong and legitimate in the region. But Ekman did not latch on to the more common critique of Swedish efforts to combat sexual violence, the critique that the extent of rape is not worthy of a country that calls itself feminist. The background to this critique is the steep increase in registered cases of rape in that Sweden has seen throughout the 2000s. As criminologists, we are very well aware that these figures cannot simply be read to represent an increase in actual rapes, but at least also reflect an increasing propensity to report, changing social norms, and lower legal thresholds. But these high and increasing figures have gained international attention, as when in 2016 the Turkish newspaper Güneş, often presented as an informal communication channel for the Turkish government, warned Turkish citizens against traveling to Sweden on the front page of their front page, under the heading "Sweden, a country of rape," as well as via the hashtag "Don't travel to Sweden" on their Twitter account. Shortly after, a poster, apparently funded by Güneş, was hung in Istanbul Ataturk Airport, with the caption, "Travel warning, did you know that Sweden has the highest rape rate worldwide?" This is thought to be a revenge for Sweden interfering in Turkish lawmaking on sexual abuse of children, as if to say that Sweden that it should take care of its own problems first before telling everyone else what to do. Political right-wing forces have taken the opportunity to criticize Sweden for being bad at combating rape, as high and rising numbers of registered rapes domestically and internationally has been interpreted to be a result of liberal migration policies and tolerance towards imported patriarchal religious norms and practices. An example of this was when in 2017, the leader of the UK right-wing party UKIP, Nigel Farage, stated that, quote, "Malmö is now the rape capital of Europe, and some argue perhaps the rape capital of the world," end of quote. As sexual violence in the region typically is interpreted as a result of and resulting in lack of gender equality, the coexistence of strong gender equality norms and an increase in the reported incidents of rape appear paradoxical. That is perhaps why sexual violence, including rape, have a continuous high presence in the media, political bodies, and popular culture, also within the region. Being criticized by key feminist debaters for being bad at taking sexual violence seriously, and being made a fool of internationally for trying to forge policies and protections on other countries that they are unable to install at home, is serious for a country that prides itself on being gender equal and to be able to protect its citizens. If sexual violence exists because of gender inequality, if the Nordics are the most gender equal countries in the world, if criminal law is as powerful in preventing crimes as feminist debaters in the region seem to presuppose, then it appears paradoxical that rape continues to be a serious problem that affects many women in the region. This makes looking for different interpretations and solutions more attractive, whether by blaming it on the import of non-gender equality-minded men from Muslim-majority countries, as the Swedish Democrats do, or to ask for even more extreme versions of the policies in place, as in the case of Ekman, who urges the Nordic politicians to look to the US. If mainstream gender equality policies didn't do the trick, maybe punishment, US style, will. As criminologists, we are aware of how sexuality and crime is a potent political combination, and that the female victim of a sexual assault serves as an asset for anyone looking to turn policies in a more racist and punitive direction. That sexual violence continue to exist in a country that thoroughly presupposes that gender equality is its cure must therefore be managed in one way or another. I have credible reports of several incidents where Swedish politicians have commented on the national rape figures off camera in supranational forums. One example is when a representative of a government of a European country contacted me to inquire whether Swedish claims that the number of rapes in Sweden has had consistently decreased over several years were correct. One such incident was also caught on camera, and this episode ended in a public retraction. This was when the Swedish Minister for Employment and Integration, Ylva Johansson, was interviewed by BBC Newsnight in 2017. During the interview, Johansson was confronted with the increasing levels of reported rape in Sweden. She responded, quote, "We can see that the level is going down and going down and going down," end of quote. A statement she would later have to retract. That representative of the Swedish government would argue that rape was on the decline during a period in which crime statistics showed a steep increase may give us some idea of how much is at stake. Another strategy may be that of Ekman, to direct attention to the law and punishment. Sweden was, during the last 2 decades, they have been able to remove legal hurdles to prosecute rape. And with the introduction of the Women's Peace Bill in 1998, Sweden broadened the net and lowered the threshold of what was to be considered sexual and gendered harms and violation, more than probably anywhere in the world. This is the background for why the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, famously is claimed to have called Sweden the Saudi Arabia of feminism. As many of you know, Sweden in 2018 changed its rape legislation to actively prohibit involuntary sex. Debates leading up to the law revision was the claim that the former law did not communicate well the content and harm of rape. That sexual violence is everywhere and pervasive is a key message in feminist rhetoric throughout the region. This is a background to discussions about the need for legislative change. The argument is that law revisions are needed as changing norms creates an uncertainty about the boundary between rape and just sex, to use Anne Cahill's term. This presents rape as in continuity with, not in breach with, sex considered acceptable and good, and something that can happen by mistake. If sexual violence is pervasive and omnipresent, part of the gender fabric of society, then it is obviously impossible to get rid of, even by the first feminist government in the world. A paradox is when contradictory statements are made and seemingly coexist. And this is the case when in Sweden, rape is represented in 2 very different ways. It is simultaneously defined as an abhorrent act that should be met with harsh punishment, and as an act that is widespread, almost normal, something that can happen to young people by mistake, if the lawmakers do not modernize the language of the law. Both statements are products of feminist insights and wins, but the question is whether their coexistence muddles debates and complicates finding solutions. Roger Burke talks about the schizophrenia of crime. With this, he means the combined preoccupation with intervening against criminality at the same time as proposing the claim that crime exists in continuity with desired acts, and that all or most have committed crime. That talk of crime can take both these forms, keep it on the top of political agendas. If rape is an apparent deviant act stemming from individual men exerting patriarchal power over women, then it becomes difficult to understand that it continues to exist in a country where gender equality is a strong norm that manifests in practices. This realization paves the way for linking rape with migration. But if rape is almost indistinguishable from just sex to the people involved, then proving and prosecuting it becomes almost impossible. This challenges the legal optimism that has been a key part of feminism in the region. Taken together, rape constitutes a lens from which to study ideas about the Nordics and about the place and status of crime and crime prevention in contemporary societies. I have used Sweden here as the main example, but we see some of the same development also in other Nordic countries. In Norway, we are currently discussing revising the legal definition of rape, and I intend to pay attention to what the debaters seem to presuppose about the power of law, about Norwegian society, and about gender and sexuality in the time to come. I am currently heading the research project Medical, Legal and Lay Understandings of Physical Evidence in Rape Cases, evidently RAPE for short. This project stems from my interest in what is considered knowledge about violation and the violated body. In Evidently Rape, we explore how physical evidence travels and is translated throughout the criminal justice process and, not least, in the interaction between medical and legal professionals and knowledge paradigms.